Now, in the meantime, let's move along and speak to Republican Congressman Darren LaHood of Illinois, who is on the line for us. Congressman, thanks for being with us here on BBC News. Just going to those comments that President Trump made there in the Oval Office with the Israeli Prime Minister behind him about moving all of the Palestinian people out of Gaza, rebuilding it over a 15-year period. Is this now official US policy, moving away from where it's been before, from a two-state solution?
Well, I think it's an aggressive policy position. It's new, obviously. It's been socialized in the last week by President Trump. But I think logistically, it's very complicated to do that. But don't ever underestimate President Trump and what he wants to do. I think we saw that over the last couple of weeks with Secretary Rubio's trip to Panama Canal, what happened with tariffs with Mexico and Canada. So this may be part of a negotiation. And if you look at what President Trump was able to do the first term in terms of the Abraham Accords and what their ambitious goals are for the Middle East, I think he deserves a little discretion here in moving forward. And so I think today is the start of that.
And when you mentioned the Abraham Accords there, do you think that President Trump is approaching this as a Middle East-wide agreement that he's trying to achieve here, that normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia, as well as Gaza, as well as perhaps other deals?
Well, I think the ultimate goal has to be an agreement with Saudi. Of course, the Palestinians have to be a part of that agreement, but that grand bargain should be a goal. It'll be good for the United States and for the region. I don't think anybody ever thought that the Abraham Accords, which of course were done with Sudan and Morocco and Bahrain and of course UAE, could have happened. But I look for the Trump administration and the team they've put in place. If you look at Steve Witkoff, Secretary Rubio, John Ratcliffe, Mike Waltz, and Morgan and Mossad Boulos, it's a great team. They understand the Middle East very well. And I think as they look at other countries and other opportunities to continue the Abraham Accords, that will bring peace and stability to the region.
And what do you think it means in the short term in terms of getting to the second phase of the Gaza ceasefire, those negotiations getting underway this week?
Well, that should be a priority. That should be priority number one, is keeping the ceasefire in place, both in Gaza and with Hezbollah in Lebanon also, making sure the ceasefire requirements are met by both sides, that hostages continue to be released, that we maintain the peace. That's going to take trust. It's going to take meeting the requirements that are a part of that. But thus far, I think the Trump administration understands that. I don't think it would have happened but for the leadership of President Trump and his team, and we got to make sure it stays in place.
And when President Trump is trying to make these deals on one hand, and then on the other hand is shuttering USAID, closing down refugee programs, how is that circle, how do you square that circle?
Well, I think initially people think of disruption, but in the grand scheme of things, as we heard from President Trump today, Secretary Marco Rubio will be in charge of what USAID was spending and be taking over that program. I think that could coincide very well with the objectives of the United States in terms of democracy and freedom and working with our allies for peace in the United States and, of course, across the world. But I think people are reacting in a way that they think it's going to happen. But again, I have a lot of faith in the team that President Trump has put in place. And I think in the end, it could be better for the United States if it's done correctly.
But what people see abroad this week is they see those programs closing. They see the individuals in their communities who've been helping them with programs packing up and leaving, being recalled back here to the US. So it isn't simply shifting the management of it from USAID to the State Department. Things are closing down.
Well, I understand that. But, you know, like anything in government, you got to look at ways to make a program more efficient, more effective, more accountable. And that's part of the exercise the Trump administration is going through right now. It doesn't mean that all that money is going to go away. There will be resources available to be spent in a wise and smart way that recognizes our principles as it relates to democracy and freedom and working with our allies to do that. So, again, I think taking a wait and see approach will be helpful in this process. And I think the Trump administration will make wise decisions with our aid and where it goes and how that helps the United States.
And when we're talking about rebuilding Gaza and those remarks from President Trump earlier today, prior to his few remarks with Prime Minister Netanyahu, he also said in the Oval Office, when it comes to rebuilding Gaza, he'd get a few guys together who had a lot of money and rebuild it. Is there a role for the US in that type of program?
Well, I think there has to be. The U.S. played a significant role in getting the ceasefire done, along with Qatar and others. We need to be helpful and supply leadership when it comes to rebuilding and making sure that there's peace in the region. And I think that will be part of the next phase once we get through the next steps of the ceasefire.
OK, well, we are awaiting to hear the outcome of that meeting between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump, and I'm sure we'll learn more there then. But for the moment, Republican Congressman Darren LaHood from Illinois, thanks so much for being with us here on BBC News.